the Foreign Correspondents Club of South Asia. This is going live on Facebook, YouTube, X, and FCC website. So may I request you to kindly put your mobile phones on silent mode. Switch- Have Mr. Afsar Muhammad. He's visiting from the US, where he teaches at the University of Pennsylvania. So he wrote this interesting book. Is originally from what we call Telangana, born in a village near Khammam, and he's been a journalist for many years, and then he went to the US, where he lives and works. Um, this is his second book. He has won several awards. This book has been published by the Cambridge University Press, and he's visiting India, so we utilize this opportunity to invite him to talk about how he came to write about this book and views on the famous Operation Polo or police action of 1948, September that year, and how the Muslims of Hyderabad and non-Muslims, Hindus, and looked at the Operation Polo. And he's interviewed about 150 people over a 15-year period to gather information about this book. So may I now request Afsar to tell us the story behind the book. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Narayana Garu, for your generous introduction. Um, Actually, I know your name for a long time. So, from my because I was a journalist before uh, getting into this teaching field. I was with Andhra Jyoti and then Andhra Bhumi Telugu newspapers. So then a lot of friends used to tell me about Venkat Narayana Garu and Parsa. I'm so happy here. I met Dinesh Sharmaji, Ranji, and then I look at this FCC Wall of Fame there. So many beautiful faces. Before I introduce this book, I just want to like share a recent poem I published about Hyderabad. Walk into any street, they all smell like relics. Walk into any lane, they still carry an unbelievable past. When you are not certain about your ways, for sure you find another cell. So, writing this book and then speaking about Hyderabad in many ways is speaking about myself, is speaking about my land, my people, my language, my tehjeeb, which is the popular term to describe or characterize Hyderabadi culture. It's even though it is very subjective and personal, when I use this term Hyderabadi past, every individual, every community, every caste, they have their own version of Hyderabadi past. It is just like any city with lot of heritage, past, then literary and cultural horizons. So every place has its own like place in a person's heart. So the story actually comes from my subjective anguish. And then in this poem, I just said, walk into any lane, they still carry an unbelievable past. This unbelievable past, this is what we are all trying to search, explore as historians. Whether you are a cultural historian, social, or linguistic historian, your goal is to explore that unbelievable past. But in the case of Hyderabad, it is not just about unbelievable past, it's more about invisible past. So, in the process of writing histories, sometimes people tend to ignore, silence, marginalize some intense moments. So, in the process of writing nationalist histories, we ignored many vernacular histories. In the process of constructing a singular language, singular culture, we silenced many cultures, many languages. Similar happened in the case of Hyderabad. There are numerous historians who wrote about Hyderabad in many languages, most importantly, English, Urdu, and Telugu. Of course, there might be histories of Hyderabad in other languages as well. But one thing that you find in all these histories is that they barely speak about one particular moment. That is what Venkatji was mentioning just now, Operation Polo, which is called police action in popular imagination. This police action happened between September 13th to 17th, 1948, to integrate the state, Nizam's Hyderabad state, into the Union government of India. In the process, between September 13th and 18th, government of India initiated military invasion. It is actually military invasion, but I used the term police action so that police action is a popular term. People, sorry, people commonly use police action. But if you look at the so many things that happened during these 5 years, it's, it's just military action, military invasion. In, in Telugu, we are using the term military durakramana. But in Urdu and other scholarly works, we are now also using the terms like massacre. In Telugu, we are using the term Uchakota. And in Urdu, we are using the term Khunrezi. But Umar Khalidi, one of the inspiring historians of Hyderabad, he used the term the Hyderabad Holocaust. According to Sundarlal Committee, which was appointed by Nehru after the police action, if you look at the numbers, it's like quite unbelievable. According to this committee, which was appointed by the government itself, 27,000 to 40,000 Muslims were killed throughout that Usmanabad, Marathwada, Latur, and then some parts of Telangana. And then some 100,000 Muslims migrated to Pakistan, USA, and other parts of the world. But the most important effect was like it's like there was an effort both politically and religiously to wipe out the Muslim community during this time. At this point, because we are all journalists, we're all working in the field of media. I just want to, because one of the big source, major source in my research was to look for the newspaper archives. Unfortunately, we don't have many media reports published during this time, but the Times from London, previously it was London, right? And then Illustrated News of London, they published elaborate news reports. They actually sent their foreign correspondents to Hyderabad. They stayed there in Hyderabad for some like months and months. So their reports that came, they used quite intriguing vocabulary. So one of the phrase they were using to describe this situation is that time, particularly, they used the term happy war. The usage itself quite intriguing, right? Is there a war that is happier? So what kind of usage is this? So there were like media politics. There was a lot of misinformation and also a lot of disinformation. So my effort, of course, my this book is not based on media reports, but I just used media reports to show how the politics of information, the data were to erase the actual history, to make invisible the history of one community. So then later, I started looking for witness testimonies. Like I interviewed people, as Narayanji was saying, 100 people who witnessed this violence from different parts of Deccan. And then one of the witnesses, his name like Abdul Qutuz Sahib. I believe you are all familiar with this popular. We were talking about Shia Islam before this week. Shia Islamic event, Muharram. Telangana, of course, you know very well. Actually, this evidence comes from Karimnagar, your own hometown. So Qutuz Sahib was a Muharram performer. He used to sing Urdu, Telugu, Muharram, long narratives. So this history of Shiism, Islam, history of the Prophet's grandsons who were martyred in the Battle of Karbala, right? And then I was actually, my previous book was about that event, but I focused more on non-Muslim participation, not Muslim participation. My work was on participation in a Muslim event. So it's like interreligious history. And then Hudus Sahib was 76 years old when I met him in 2006. After the performance, it's a long narrative. After the singing, he then suddenly started talking about police action. And then he said, quote, the police action was an end of many good things in our lives. We lost not only many friends, our personal careers, houses, and the most importantly, the beautiful light. This was the key term he was using in Arabic, Hisan and a tahjib. These are two important keywords from his conversation. Tahjib, culture of our everyday life. If someone says it is just about a few Muslims, no, not at all. It is a pain about the entire community of the then Hyderabad and Telangana. Quote ends. So this was the first time I was like exposed to certain reality, which is not confined to Muslims. According to him, so Sundarlal committee was saying that 27,000 to 40,000 Muslims were killed, but among killed, it's not just Muslims. There were Christians, there were Hindus. So those numbers were not properly documented. We don't have, of course, we don't have any evidence for any of this because most of the time, the history of that particular movement, we have like three major historical events working. One was nationalism. So everyone was talking about freedom struggle. Of course, we should talk about freedom struggle. And then most historians, they were documenting the histories of freedom fighters or those events related to freedom struggle. That is one. And the second, particularly those who are familiar with Telangana and Hyderabad history, during that period, Telangana and Hyderabad, they were experiencing a historical struggle, which is called Telangana Armed Struggle between 1946, of course, it was ended in 1951. And then there was a third historical movement, which is called Telugu linguistic movement, right? So the formation of Andhra Pradesh itself is a result of this Telugu linguistic movement. So 1956, November 1st. So between these, 46 to 1956, to these 8 years of history, lot of history books, so much written about all these three big movements: nationalism, Telangana, armed struggle, and Telugu linguistic movement. But none of these books, history books, mentioned about this violence of 1948 Police Act. And then when I interviewed these people, I kind of interviewed 100 people who witnessed this. So among them, there were freedom fighters, leftist activists, women activists, educators, ordinary people, and journalists. So most of these witnesses, of course, due to COVID, then like very natural causes, we lost 90 people from that part, the witnesses. So my effort now is to bring that material to the table and then analyze this event, what really happened, why that history was made invisible, and what made Union government to initiate this military invasion. So since there is no evidence available, I basically depended on witness testimonies. those people who witnessed the violence, just like partition stories. And then on the other hand, I have these written materials like media reports, government documents, and then literary sources, autobiographies. So I blended them, and then result is this book. So with that brief introduction, I want to stop there and want to listen from you. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you. We have two eminent colleagues here. Dinesh has written a book on Hyderabad. Parsa has been writing a lot on these things. So, Dinesh, may I request you to uh, make your observations, please, on the book and the city?
Thank you, Venkat, for this opportunity and come back to FCC after a long time. I used to be a member, as I mentioned, when I was representing Bangkok Post, and it's fairly regular. But yeah, book discussions are a new, is an innovation which you introduced during this presidency, which I think is important. I attended Krishna Rao's and book by Mr. Narendra, discussion on that. So I think it's important to talk about books, and it helps writers. They like, I mean, whoever writes a book needs feels good when it is discussed. It's a wintry day, so I'm sure everybody has made extra effort to come here. So maybe they deserve an incentive from you, Venkat, after the discussion. So I speak here as a Paitaishi Hyderabadi, as you mentioned in the book. You know, a lot of people, that's a term used, born Hyderabadi, Mulki, and so. And as a citizen, and not as a uh, historian or a literary critic, because a lot of this book deals a lot with literature, but I'm neither. But I speak from my experience as a citizen of Hyderabad and somebody who has lived there through the most of the period which you mentioned. That I was born in '61, so I've lived through that period. So it's an important and relevant book in the present context. It's not history; it's the history talking to the present. That's what I found that this book is about. Just as Nehru is invoked or abused in the present day context, depending on which side of the fence you are. And Nizam is being invoked and abused in the political discourse in Hyderabad these days. So the past is always with us. So the book has, and this both augur well for the book writers because the number of books which have come out on Nehru are going by the day, and he's being revisited, relooked, and being critiqued in a new fashion. In the same way, Hyderabad is attracting quite a bit of attention. Yes, it is good. They're talking about the legacy of both Nehru and the Nizam in different contexts, of course. And incidentally, Nehru is also a villain in this book. I'm going to talk about it later, elaborate what I feel. See, as you mentioned, Hyderabad's story has been a case of lost and found. And there are three important dates you mentioned, which are very key in the story of lost and found. 1948, integration happened, about which the book deals a lot. 1956. I mean, people tend to forget this period of 48 to 56. See, from 1948 to 1956, Hyderabad existed as it was before. The geographic, the political boundaries were same as they were in the Nizam's period. So, from 48 to 56, Hyderabad state it retained its uh, multilingual and multicultural character. The second important date is 1956 when it became the capital city. The part of Nizam's Hyderabad was taken out and put together due to this linguistic agitation. And 1956, it became the capital of Andhra Pradesh. So, the part of Hyderabad state, which was Telangana, became part of Andhra Pradesh. And the third date important is 2014, when it kind of de-merged from Andhra Pradesh and, not fully, the Telangana district became Telangana state. The Telangana district which are there in the Nizam state pre-48 became Telangana state now. So these are three important dates, I think, in this whole story. And if suppose Hyderabad had retained its character as it was before 1948 or till 1956, it would have been India's only multilingual and multicultural state. There are many states where a couple of languages are spoken, where there's no other geographical area or state province in India where multiple languages were spoken. At least four I know: Urdu, Hindi, Telugu. Hindi came much later, but Telugu, Kannada, and Urdu were the main, and Marathi. Four languages, five languages. So that was the multicultural, multilinguistic character, multi-religious, of course. So that would have been the only state, and we can have another discussion whether the whole politics of the formation of states based on languages, and that's another trajectory which we don't deal with it because it's been dealt with elsewhere. But yeah, so we lost that when 48 to 56 it retained that character, and 56 when it was no. We also had Andhra State with the Kurnool as the capital for an interim period. The Telugu speaking state was carved out. So, and then that was merged from United Andhra Pradesh, as we know, and again demerged in 2014. So, after Telangana has been formed, and the course started during the separatist agitation after 2000. Of course, there were other agitations in 1969. It died out and it picked up after 2000. There has been this whole, you know, uh, questions relating to Telangana, relating to Hyderabad, relating to languages in the state of Muslims. All those issues have come back, and because of political and other issues. That's one point. Second point I want to highlight importance of this book is unlike the partition of Bengal and Punjab, which have been ingrained in the collective memory of India, especially this part of India. I mean, we always talk about partition north because it's nearer to us. There's a partition museum. And again, there is also a revivalism and putting the story in perspective. Unlike that partition, the story of Hyderabad of 1948 integration or merger or whatever you call it has not, or the overall impact of partition in southern India has not been recorded. And that is the invisible part in which this book is trying to bring out. So this partition story, it is as traumatic, as painful as the partition of Bengal and Punjab, so to say. And that's what the nature of that event has been brought out in this. Police action was equally painful and it involved violence, migration, in-migration, people coming into Hyderabad, people going out to Pakistan and to other parts of there's a lot of migration happened within the state. Like people from districts came to Hyderabad and people from Hyderabad went out. So there are a lot of trauma associated with that. That has remained invisible for a number of reasons, and that's coming out in different segments because Telangana and Hyderabad have a new identity. The part of one of the reasons why it became invisible or it remained invisible for that long is we were never taught that history. I mean, that question is there in other contexts also. I grew up in Hyderabad, but I don't remember reading anything about Hyderabad in the school about Qutub Shahis or other Asaf Jahis or even the Nizam or whatever. I don't know about Parsa if it was taught in Hyderabad public school, which itself is the legacy of the Jagirdari system, but we were never taught that in school. So it is out of the collective memory, and Hyderabad is so too. Nor did we come to know much about the composite culture of Hyderabad, and because but it was all around us. My family lived in the so old city, which according to Hyderabad is quoted in this book is the real Hyderabad or the Asli Hyderabad as they say. And Purana Shahar, and the locality where I lived had not only Hindus and Muslims, but also Dakkani Sikhs. It's a big minority. I mean, those Sikhs have nothing to do with, or they don't speak Punjabi, they don't follow the customs, but they're Sikhs by faith. So we not only had few mosques and temples, and we also had a gurudwara in this area called Petnabur, Charmal, that area just across. So this shared, memories are there, but it is not a recorded memory. So what Afsar has tried to do is bring out what is there in the mind, in the hearts of people, those who have lived those times. Of course, some people have done like Karen Leonard has done with the Kayasthas and the community-based studies where she has done the oral history and tried to reconstruct that. But this is goes beyond much of all of that and relating to a particular event of 1948. I think that's the strength of the book. I mean, talking of today's Hyderabad, people get confused between the Nizams and the Pagas and the Salar Jungs. They all think it's all one because of the lack of a sense of history. So it has been a silenced history, is called the whole story, silenced history. Another reason is there's been a big, kind of uh, distance between people living in Hyderabad and people living in the district. I mean, I grew up in Hyderabad, but I hardly knew anything about rest of Telangana. I mean, there's no communication. There was nothing. कोई दूर की बात है. We never, because Hyderabad was always the place where the so-called elites lived, the ruling class lived, and that culture continued much after 1948. So people living in Hyderabad thought that okay, we are important people and we don't know anything about the rest of the areas, and that's another point where most of the testimonies, a large number of testimonies come from places outside Hyderabad. I mean, among of course, the demography has changed in 1984, and there have been several, points in where the demography has changed. But still, knowledge about Hyderabad among Hyderabadis, people living in the city, about the rest of what was happening in the rest of Telangana, is minimal. And the lens which Afsar has chosen to highlight the silence history is unique. It's not a history, a political history. It's not a cultural history. But it's taken cultural in part, but it's not a political or a military history, though he talked about what happened in 1948. It's more a the lens which is taken is literature and cultural renaissance. So which is again a very unique way to look at history. How do you reconstruct? There are many ways to do that. You only look at archives, you only look at the political history, but you look at the literature, so to speak. Because in the literature also, people have looked at the Qutub Shahis and the rise, the legacy of Dakkani and all that, but people have not looked at the modern literature, how it portrayed Hyderabad or what are the issues that were discussed. So, to my knowledge, it has not been done. So that's the strength of the book, and because most of the people mentioned in the book, like poets, activists, writers, journalists, artists, and institutions, most of the names are new to me. I mean, for the reasons which I mentioned, except for, say, Makhdoom, Kaloji, Dashrathi, and few big names, most of the other actors which you've interviewed and highlighted are new to me, to my generation, at least, people who have grown up in Hyderabad. Because most of the time we are discussing Hyderabad in terms of a binary, whether it is Nizam versus Patel, or it is Hindu versus Muslim, old city versus, new city, but it is much more nuanced and multi-layered. So he has tried to uncover some of those layers. I think it's very using literary narrative and all forms to understand history is also important because it gives us a window to historians to study, a new window to historians to study history. I mean, to look at history, which we never do. For example, Toba Takes Thing, a short story by Manto, is remained ingrained in all our minds because it's so powerful depiction of what happened at the partition. It has been made into film, drama, and all. So it was just a short story of a few thousand words, but that brings out the horror of partition. So literature from that point of view is very important. Or Train to Pakistan by Kushwant Singh that tells you that, and the this television serial on Doordarshan called Bunyad that told the story that brought the people's version of partition to the people. So I think it's very important to look at literature from that point of view. And my own introduction to Hyderabad, as I said, hinterland Telangana was films of Sam Benegal, Nishant and Ankur, and that was the first time a lot of people in the 70s who grew up in the urban milieu came to know that, okay, there's this part, and that's how the Jagirdari system worked, or even worked till the even after 48 and integration also. So it's from that point of view. He also mentions about the use of folklore, the Tariku Katha. It's again a mix of Tarikh is Urdu word for history, and Katha is a Telugu word for story. So there's the genre which we know talk about historical fiction, and that's also part of it. It's an important to look at history from a different perspective, and it can powerfully convey the trauma of police action. It is, and some new facts come out, like we knew about the library movement, which the Nizam tried to curb it because the libraries were sort of places where rebellion, people could gather, and then social formations and political ideas accommodate. So he tried to curb that. And the Vyayam Shalas came up, no, the gyms, people congregate. So he put a ban on those activities. But when I never knew that during the military action, libraries were burned down in the rural Telangana. So that's a, imagine. So that's recorded here through testimony. But I don't know if there is a evidence from the district reports or whatever, unless we really look into it. And because a lot of material is becoming available, fortunately now. So maybe some records will be there that the libraries in the rural areas were burned down by the Indian military. So this whole approach of using alternative archives, one form of history can be written by using the archives which are there in the state and archives. Because you mentioned about the London Times correspondent coming here. I found in some papers in the National Archive that Nizam had mounted a massive PR effort anticipating an action by the government of India. So maybe these correspondents came as part of that effort. So they hired some ex-BBC and London Times correspondents to act as PR agents for Hyderabad government. So there was a massive build-up happening before 1948. So the war was to be won by public opinion. The government of India also alerted everybody that this is what is going to happen. All the ambassadors were told this is our viewpoint. But Nizam was also preparing for that. So the public opinion they wanted to win. So maybe these reports are filed by that, because I have seen those letters where money has been transferred to the Agent General of Hyderabad in London to appoint a lobbyist to not only convey the MPs but also to convert the press in UK and America in favor of the Nizam. So that was anticipated. So all those efforts were going on. So the use of alternative archives to reconstruct this whole police action story, I think, is very fascinating. That's what I found in this book. And it addresses many questions relating to Muslim identity 48 and in the aftermath of that. And so that's and that pretty much connects, the concluding part also connects to the present day questions of being a Muslim in an atmosphere of a majoritarian discourse. I mean, there are lots of books our friends have written, being Muslim in modern India. So it connects to that present discourse. So I think that's a very important one. I'll just take 1 minute and I'll end here. In the beginning, I mentioned about the Nehru being a villain in this book. See, if we, as I understand and my situation, the preceding 10 years of police actions were very critical in Hyderabad, as it was in the rest of India for the political freedom movement was gaining. But in Hyderabad, what was happening was that, that's when the social formation started working as an offshoot of Usmania University. One of the reasons, because the moment you have a university, it was already 20 years old by then, people were meeting, new ideas were coming. Universities are not just about textbooks and all that. The new ideas of freedom and liberty and rights and everything was being discussed. So there was a Vande Mataram movement, and quite a few of those movements were taking place around formation around Usmania University. And there were also political formations like Majlis was there, Arya Samaj was there, Hindu Mahasabha was there. There was an intense activity in the past 10 years, the preceding 10 years from say mid-30s to 1948. And Hyderabad had remained isolated politically from rest of India for that time. For example, even if Hyderabad Congress was not affiliated to Indian National Congress for a long time, it grew on its own. It was, I mean, it worked closely with Arya Samaj and Hindu Mahasabha, and it had no problems of doing that. So it was isolated not only politically but from various other point of views. And Nizam, between the interwar, the first war and the second war, he wanted to consolidate himself politically. And Second World War provided him with that opportunity. First World War gave him the title, not a faithful ally, formally given the title. So he wanted to prove that during the Second World War, a massive war effort in Hyderabad. So that kind of raised some, you know, discomfort in the subjects of the Nizam that how come so much of money is being spent on the war. And he had already celebrated his silver jubilee, 25 years of his ascending to the throne. And some of these ideas were put into his mind. The caliphate also had disappeared. He married his sons into the caliphate. So all this culminated and some ideas were put into his mind that he could be the leader of Islamic world, not just the Muslims in India, but he could head the Islamic world globally. And that sort of got into his mind. It's not as if things didn't happen, that diplomatically things were tried to avert. And of course, the best thing would have been to avert the bloodshed. But the only condition with the last few letters of, as Rajgopalacharya, uh, yeah, he wrote to Nizam, were about, he put mainly two conditions that you get rid of Razakar elements from your government. And And the only the argument Nizam gave was that I need them to control law and order. So Indian military was posted in Hyderabad prior to that to control, law and order. We could help with that. So negotiations were there. In fact, Rajaji also wrote to Mountbatten that what was your correspondence with Nizam, which Mountbatten refused to share with Rajaji, saying that the tradition is that we take away all the correspondence. I didn't get anything from my predecessor, so you're not going to get. So some of those correspondence were there. So what was that Mountbatten had promised to Nizam? So that Rajaji didn't come to. So there was a diplomatic effort, there was a political effort, and then I suppose the military effort was there. So I mean, look at this whole thing. Was it inevitable in a sense that could you have a feudal ruler who is a puppet of a militia governing a large landmass of India? I mean, that was a political question which Nehru and Patel had to address. Could they have avoided a bloodshed? Could they have avoided a military action proceeding from the five directions, in Hyderabad and clamping the economic, all those things were there. There were political decisions taken. So that's where I rest my case. So Nehru is a villain, like many other things, but I think look at the circumstances in which it happened. It could have been avoided. That remains an open question. So I'll stop here. But it's a great book. As you say, just read one line. That kind of sums up about what Hyderabad is. The politics of remembering and forgetting, silencing and marginalizing individual persons, socio-cultural institutions, and political movements play their role in the triangle of fact, memory, and history. So I think Hyderabad is caught in this triangle of fact, memory, and history. I'll stop here. It is a great book.
Thank you, Dinesh. May I now invite Amsa to make his comments?
Yeah, I think this is a very different kind of a book. It opens up a Pandora's box, should create a lot of controversy, lot of debate, which is essential. It is not just like any other book, academic study, and leaves it at that. Uh, yes, as Dinesh has really pointed out, it's not political history per se. It's a cultural history done at a people's level, trying to talk to the people and trying to reconstruct. Plenty of things to agree with and plenty of things to disagree with in this book because the subject is complicated and you can't have only one view or but he touches the very very complicated issues, something which has not been done for a long time, ever since I can remember after independence. I don't think people have taken this, let the issues, the complexity of the issue remain and not simplifying as much as possible. I mean, refusing to simplify. So the tensions, the fault lines are there for everyone to see, and how people negotiated with these tensions. The one major point Sir makes in this book is that people whom he has spoken to, and what comes out is all the Muslims were not Razakars, all the Muslims were not communal, and many Muslims, many in the districts, are part of the social fabric, and they took part in the communist movement. Many Muslims, especially the middle class and the lower middle class people, were part of the communist movement, which sort of transcended religion. That's a very important point. And that the Razakar movement was that of a minority group. It was there. There's no denying it or no watering it down, but it has its own uh, logic and compulsions of its own. What Afsar tries to bring out is the Muslims per se were not are politically aware, especially the educated Muslims and all that. And the politically aware Muslims cast their support for the communists and for the people of Telangana rather than with the Razakars or for the Muslim dominant state. So that's the main issue that comes out. Secondly, he looks at the other side being the Telugu speaking people in the Telangana region. Of course, I think this book should open up the possibility of seeing what it was like in the Kannada speaking districts of Telangana and the Marathi speaking districts of Telangana. What were the local movements there? And by picking up the literary trend, I think he shows the complexity of the dilemmas of the Telugu writers, and he picks them up rather interestingly. Most of them are from the district. Some of them are from Khammam district, where we have lands and all that, and some are from and mainly they seem to be from the upper caste, the Brahmin community. These writers. So Dasharathy is one of them, and Rambotra is there. And their experience is very interesting. They were schooled in Urdu, they were steeped in Urdu literature, and yet they had to also plow the thing of bringing up Telugu language and writing in Telugu. So that tension or dilemma between the uh, Telangana Telugu writers faced. I mean, they were exposed to a multilingual situation, and yet they, while absorbing the best of the Urdu traditions, they chose to write in Telugu. I mean, that is a really lovely aspect of the thing. What is the influence of Telugu on contemporary 20th century Telugu literature in Urdu on Telugu literature in Telangana? I mean, it would make a very fascinating reading. And he also shows that some of these Telugu writers were bilingual in the sense they were writing in Urdu and they were writing in Telugu. This man Murthy was writing a book in Urdu first as his first draft, and then later on it is translated into Telugu. So that was the deep influence of the culture. It's like somebody today wanting to write in English because that is the language familiar to them, and then translating it back into their mother tongue. So this cultural boundary line between Telugu and Urdu, between the uh, the literate community, which at that time happened to the Brahmins, and the Urdu writers, who were what was the Urdu traditions and how they absorbed the Urdu, the literary traditions of derived from Persian, and a very lovely thing. But what he shows is, apart from one or two exceptions, he gives prominence to the Telangana movement, which is, yes, it has the communist movement, and that it has played a dominant role. And he leaves it at that. And then I don't think he has mentions, but he doesn't give enough importance as to what was the influence of the Razakar movement on the minds of certain ordinary people. Why did Bahadur Yar Jang's rhetoric work with some people, and why did Qasim Razvi, who comes from the districts and then uh, becomes an important figure for the Razakars? Of course, he brings out the tension of post 1948, that all Muslims were identified as Razakars, which was really, using a broad brush stroke to color a whole community, which is not the case, because most Muslims in the districts, especially, were innocent, and they were not. They were anti-Razakars. They were Muslims. I mean, they were steeped in Muslim tradition as a religion, but they were not communal. And that's a very, very important point which has not been made. And this is a crucial issue in the present times, because the BJP propaganda in Telangana, in the rhetoric, is look, the Muslims are Razakars, the Muslims are communal, and we protected them. The story is much more complicated. And A.G. Nurani made it more polarized by saying Patel is the villain. As a matter of fact, Patel and Nehru were in close touch. Their correspondence shows about Hyderabad, how Nehru was sharing information with Patel that this is what is happening, how the arms are being sent to Hyderabad, and how it has to be controlled. And the Prime Minister Laik Ali Khan, he told them that Laik Ali Khan said the All India Radio is giving all negative news about Hyderabad. So he said, if the negative news is what is coming out of Hyderabad, I mean, this he wrote to Nehru. So Nehru replied, saying that we can't help it, that if you can't control the situation in Hyderabad. So this untangling, of the Muslim identity with the Razakars. But the Razakas, it's like, I mean, it's a story with the Muslims in all over India, that Muslims were all Muslim Leaguers. Not all Muslims were Muslim Leaguers, because Punjab, the Unionist Party, was not Muslim League. They had coalition with the Sikhs and the Hindus. Sikandar had conformed the government. Similarly, in Bengal, there was Krishak Samaj Party, Krishak Party, which was Fazlul Haq and all that people, and they were not. I mean, as a matter of fact, Muslim League was in a minority among the Muslim groups. Only at the end, yes, it shows that they all fell into the Muslim trap, identity trap, and they said, no, we have to join hands with. So in Hyderabad also, I think the Muslims have paid a price for being Muslims in that situation, and because of the Razakar movement. Like Muslim leaguers, Muslims in India in general paid a price for, because Muslim League took over the leadership. So that distinction, I think he makes it quite effectively. My only quarrel with him is, in the last few years, there has been a lot of revisionist history sort of thing. I think you mentioned Sunita also as one of the persons. Her argument is that the communist movement was not against the Nizam, but against the landlords in the Telangana thing. So they were really, and
Razakas at another level were also against the Hindu landlords as part of the Hindus thing. And she gives a conspiratorial theory that Muslims and the Razakars and the communists were hand in glove sometimes, and they had carried out operations together. Don't know how true it is, but the story is being brought back, and the arguments are being offered, and a new, a new partisanship is coming out to say who is wrong and who is right. And but I thought the cultural situation, which you handle so well in the book, that is a very important aspect. That how Telugu being influenced by, because official language and dominant culture, because it was the dominant culture, because the elites were Muslims, and the government was run in Urdu language. It was in Persian till 1900, and after that the records changed to Urdu, and everybody learned Urdu. But at the same time, the Telugu movement, linguistic movement, uh, went off very well. And I think to that extent, the Sadashiv's example is very powerful. That he is not in the communist camp, but he's in the literary camp. And if I remember rightly, he was also a friend of P.V. Narasimha Rao. And P.V. Narasimha Rao wrote a letter to him in his last days after Narasimha Rao left his prime ministership, and Sadashiv was unwell. So he wrote a letter to his friend, childhood friend, in saying, Sadashiv, I would have loved to come and see you, but I can't. I am facing these cases. People are out to get against me. There is a lot of vengeance. It's a very beautiful personal letter. I think the only time when he let out his personal agony, because otherwise he had no one to speak to as such. So the Sadashiv's example of the real agony of what to how to keep Urdu and still continue with, that's a very beautiful artistic dilemma people had in the Telugu movement. And I do not know, you mentioned Andhra Mahasabha, but I think it was in the Telangana area, it was the Andhra Saraswata Parishad, which played a dominant role. Andhra Mahasabha was in the coastal Andhra and the other areas. And the communists, I think that is another point. It is the communists who raised the slogan of Vishal Andhra. For some reason, when all the people in Telangana, everybody, mostly the Hindus, mostly all the politicians of the Congress, and they said Hyderabad should remain a separate entity. And I'm told that Fazlul Haq Commission said it would be a model state in India if it is that, as Dinesh has mentioned, multilingual, multicultural. I mean, it would have been a perfect thing. So, but anyhow, the politics would have come in there also, because the conflict would have been between the Telugus, Kannadigas, and Marathis, and the Tamilians. Yeah. So that politics would have taken. But what I have seen is that you have really dealt with a very sensitive topic, very complicated topic, and it is very unusual. And I hope it leads to a lot more debate. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. Anyway, it's all history now, but let us look back. British India had 562 province, this kingdoms and stuff like that. Out of them, 561 kingdoms decided to join either India or Pakistan. And Hyderabad, which was the size of France and the richest state at that point of time, Larry Collins and Dominic Lapierre devotes 3 pages to the Nizam in pretty much midnight, if you have read that. Now, but of course, Nizam was very miserly, but he did a lot of good things for the people of Hyderabad state, and Nehru called Hyderabad the Sangam of Indian culture. A lot of people don't seem to remember. But why did the government of India undertake Operation Polo? Here was a situation where communist movement was growing in Telangana, and then Qasim Razvi and the Razakars were determined to keep Hyderabad as an independent state They called it Azad Hyderabad. And the Nizam was brainwashed or forced by Qasim Razvi to insist that, in spite of 561 kingdoms deciding to join either India or Pakistan, this should remain independent, Azad Hyderabad. And his second option, if that was not possible, was to Hyderabad should go to Pakistan. In the heart of India, you have a state where the rest of India has become democratic. Pakistan also has become an independent country. Could it have been possible if the Razakars, under the leadership of Qasim Razvi, did not do what they did? Would Operation Polo have taken place? The Nizam took his case to the United Nations. And of course, he did a lot of things like, funding um, he gave a lot of money to Makkah, Medina, and you had the Medina building, and a lot of good things he did, of course. And the British have acknowledged that when they were in trouble during the wars, he gave them a lot of money. And what they were trying to do was they were trying to acquire lakhs of rifles and pistols and different kinds of ammunition from France, and some of them were smuggled to Karachi, and from there they were being sent to Hyderabad. So it was a very dicey kind of situation. And Mountbatten, who had signed the standstill agreement with the Nizam, had left India in June 1948. And Nizam approached Jinnah for help, but he was already on his deathbed. And 2 days after Jinnah died, the police action or Operation Polo started, which lasted all of 109 hours, a little more than 4 days. The Sundarlal Commission report does say that 27 to 40,000 people were killed. I don't know how many of them were Muslims and how many of them were non-Muslims. Unofficial figures put that figure to 2 lakhs. Now, here was a state where the population of Muslims was 18%. The rest of other people were Hindus and other religions. So, could it have survived after as an independent state surrounded by a democratic India? And what are your views on that? Next.
For your wonderful. Starting with Dinesh ji and Parsa ji and then Venkat ji. I'm so lucky today to have your comments and feedback. There are so many things that we need to unpack from this history. Like any history of violence, political violence, drama, and then this is being described as Hyderabad Holocaust. So what I did basically is to come up with a very primary like evidence. Whatever material I have been using in this book is like I would say for the first time we are talking about this event and all the people who gave like witness narratives, we lost most of them. That is the saddest part of this work. So there are like so many political questions that I need to respond to, but I'm not getting into that political discussion as far as this event is concerned. I want to show and then like make an argument that how this impacted an ordinary person. I am using the term. It's not about Muslims, not about Hindus, not about Christians. As you said, Out of those 40,000, actually, I heard that 200,000 people were killed. Out of those 200,000 people, we are not sure how many of them are Muslims, Hindus, or Christians. Because the killings happened in a way that there is no way that you can clearly come up with identification. So there is a novel called Corpse, published during this period, that describes the way killings happen. So there is my evidence actually when I am writing this book. I was very careful when using these categories. And then coming to the political question, which I actually don't want to get into, but now at this point, because of all the discussions that were happening around about nationalism and regionalisms, also Telangana movement, different phases of Telangana movement, it's very important to understand how these politics work. The saddest part of this story is that none of these political entities really cared for the victims, the killings, the violence. So they just want to forget that history. As you mentioned, there are politics of forgetting and remembering. And then, of course, for the Nehru government, there was a political urgency to resolve it because in 1952 elections, there was uh, like a rumor, very popular rumor that communists are going to win the election. Nehru and then Sardar Patel, they wanted to block those possibilities. So there is that political dimension. And then if police action hadn't happened, what would have been the fate of Hyderabad? That question is, I believe, it could be avoided. So much violence, it could be avoided. There was no need for military invasion because by the time these things were happening, Nizam was already a weak entity. So in a very like not much, it won't really take much time that Nizam would surrender, obviously. But I don't think it is about Nizam. This entire military invasion was not just about Nizam. It is also about the growing influence of communists. So I hear from my witnesses that although I emphasize it the term ordinary people, there were killings of a lot of communists, even from remote parts of Deccan. So military invasion, if you read from that lens, see from that lens, it's more a political kind of act against the communists. And then, of course, Nehru was key in this most of these things, but the most important person is Sardar Patel. I recently published a piece in the Quint online magazine why Sardar Patel was so particular about Hyderabad. So I made an argument that more than Nehru, it was important for Sardar Patel to control, to discipline the state. I hope that makes sense. That's what I believe. That's my response.
Um, he has to. Yeah, yeah, yeah. All right. Sorry. He Friends, we'll take a few questions. We'll go straight from here to the airport
Yeah.
to catch a flight to go back to America. So, whoever has a question, kindly raise your hand. Wait for the microphone to come to you, and then put your question. Identify yourself and put a question. Thank you.
My name is Sudhakar Reddy. I'm from Hyderabad. It's,
Speaker
as
team
a
head.
lawyer in Supreme Court. See, every this, if I'm correct, 17th September, right? There's a lot of confusion among the current generation, especially media confusing every year.
Right.
Media and political parties also in Hyderabad. Is it a integration or a liberation or a accession or annex? Every these are four kind of accession, annexation, and liberation and integration. So every political party, even whether BJP or Congress integration, even Telangana TRS, they celebrated officially integration celebration, and BJP other way they said liberation. So every year there's a confusion in among the new generation of this. So what exactly you say this Hyderabad people? What exactly you call this 17th September?
Thank you so much. One thing that I want you to take note in this when you are talking about this incident, the language they were deploying. In 1948, there was a different language. After 1998, it's a different language, and then after 2014, where the nature of language, the politics of language are always there. So the idea about integration, annexation, of course, that is the goal of the union government to integrate Nizam state into the union government. It is official vocabulary. We don't have any, there is no confusion about it. Of course, we understand that this is a newly formed nation state, and they really need, because Hyderabad is the heart of the country. It's not like Kashmir, right? So they really need that control Hyderabad, and then they need to discipline the political setting there. So integration, annexation was the term used by the government and also the media at that point, mainstream media. But it's not about the integration at all. What happened during this process of integration? What we really need to kill people, all these thousands of people, according to you, like 200,000, right? And then do we need to erase the very entity of a community? These are two questions that we need to ask. When it comes to those two questions, integration, the usage of integration doesn't matter. The politics of integration doesn't matter. This idea actually came after 1998 when Advani came to Hyderabad and gave a talk inviting everyone, all political parties, and then individuals to celebrate the integration of Hyderabad state. So the idea of integration returned. Yes, in 1998. Right, right. Liberation. So, but whose liberation is this? You are not talking about history. How do you understand this liberation? So when you talk about, because there was this, um, they were jubilant about this. They want to celebrate it. How do you celebrate the killing, violence, trauma? That is the question here, right? So I just want to look at the human face of this particular incident rather than the politics, power politics. So, if you think about those kind of aspects, the human aspect of this event, we don't really care about the other vocabulary like integration, liberation, annexation. That yes. So this is because I also one of the goals in this book is to unpack those politics of uh, political vocabulary. Thank you so much for the question.
Yeah, just
I'm Dinesh Sharma. I have not read the book, so I would not like to ask any penetrating question. But I would like to redirect what the counterfactual question of Mr. Venkat Narayan. What would have happened if there was no money integration or liberation, or if Hyderabad had to remained an independent entity? What would have happened? Situation.
Afsar, may I remind you that Qasim Razvi has
Yeah.
said to Haider that if only the Nizam listened to my advice, he would have been the ruler of the whole of India.
Yeah. Yes, yes. So the idea was basically Azad Hyderabad, independent Hyderabad, right? So Nizam was like really confident. Not only Nizam, the elite sections of Hyderabad city, particularly, they were really confident that Nizam would very soon form a national government. So that was like I actually don't buy those statements because they were just this is all just like the word integration. Qasim Razvi was also playing with this vocabulary, right? So however he was trying to define Azad Hyderabad, that entire vocabulary was nothing but the formation of Muslim state, right? So Azad Hyderabad is like very like it's a, it's like a great debate, but in practical sense, it never worked out. And then Hasim Rezvi made it a dirty word. That is what I believe.
Just a brief thing as to what would have happened if Hyderabad had remained independent. I think the Qasim Razvi phenomenon, the Dhaka phenomenon was temporary. And actually, if you look at the overall record of the Nizam, he has been modern, he industrialized the state, he was interested in education. He would have made it perhaps a good, ideal state, independent state. But our narrative was so much that the whole of India from Kashmir to Kanyakumari
Right.
is one. That went against the thing. So there is a possibility of looking at it that it could have been an ideal state, of communal harmony.
Right.
Sir, my question is, while integrating all the states at the time of independence, princely states and all, why India adapted? So for the Kashmir is concerned, they had what is called accession, that what is called accession agreement. When it comes to the Hyderabad, that Kashmir is also dominated by Muslims.
Right.
Here also dominated by Muslims in Hyderabad. Why they took the military action? So for this Bombay side, when you go, Goa till 1975, it was a Portuguese. Why? 65. So why the Patel, this Nehru have not planned to merge with this country?
One
Left out.
one
That is my question.
yeah, correct. Thank you. One thing is the location. Hyderabad was the heart of the country. So the statement given by Nehru was that if the heart like uh, if heart like is a sick or he used the word cancer.
Yeah. I think Patel
Yeah.
said that you can't
But-
I can't have a body where
Right.
there's a cancer in the stomach.
Yeah, cancer in the stomach. So that impacts the entire body, right? So they don't, their that vocabulary, body vocabulary they were using. Also, there is the politics of Mata, nationalism, and then that vocabulary Sardar Patel was using, it's like just fits into this idea of nationalism. But the other princely states, they were not in the heart of the country. They were,
Size matter.
even
They were
Kashmir
all very
is like the border, right? But our only concern about even so, of course, Sardar Patel was so particular even about Kashmir, and then he was always talking about Nehru not taking it seriously. All those things. Yeah. They because they are either in the borders, yeah, or somewhere else. So they are not at the right.
So, yeah,
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right. That is one thing.
States or regions which repulse into integration. Why?
no,
The very nature of
Right, Kashmir for way of some
Mhm.
agreement, instrument of
the very
no such negotiation agreement stated
no,
There is a standstill agreement
Yeah,
for 1 year.
there was an agreement,
Yes.
but the very nature of Hyderabad politics, the, the very nature of Hyderabad politics at the point, you have Qasim Rizvi, and then you have Nizam not accepting any proposal. And then most important factor, as I just explained, Telangana rebellion. It was led by communists, right?
dominated. You see the communists are majority in the elections, first elections.
Yeah, but right. But not as much as in Telangana.
Ravi Narayan
Because
Reddy got
Telangana
more
was
votes than Nehru in 1952.
right. Yeah. So the locations, everything, yeah, everything depends on the location, right? So the location and the politics of that location. If there was no Telangana armed rebellion, there was no need for that. Yes, intense act, right? Yeah.
Kashmir and Hyderabad can't be compared because Kashmir was a Muslim
Mhm.
majority state
Yeah.
ruled by a Hindu ruler.
Right.
And
Mhm.
here was the other way. Here it was the other. So you
Right,
can't
right.
have an equivalent state. I mean, the approaches were there, they were bordering another country and here it was different. But apart from that,
Yeah.
so the size, Goa and Pondicherry, they were very fine.
Right.
Anyway,
Thank
we
you
can
so much.
discuss this further. May I now, thanks very much. May I now invite my colleague Simran to propose a vote of thanks and also give mementos to our three panelists. Thank you.
On behalf of the Foreign Correspondents Club of South Asia, a very warm thank you to Afsar Mohammed for being with us this evening for this wonderful discussion. And we are all, especially me, looking forward to reading this book. It sounds very interesting and I think it opens up a lot of questions which we have and it will answer them. A big thank you also to our distinguished panelists, Mr. Rao and Mr. Sharma, for being here with us today for the discussion. This was streamed live on the FCC Facebook page and on the Twitter account. And a recording of the discussion will be available in the archives section of the FCC Facebook page. So if you ever want to revisit the discussion, it will be available. Once again, sir, thank you so much for being with us and for the wonderful discussion. Thank you.
Afsar.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Venkatji.
Thank you.
Got to go. Sorry,
Yeah,
I
you have
couldn't
to catch a
stay.
plane.
Partha
Thank you.
garu. Yeah. Thank you so much.
It was lovely.
It's a very good book.